Welcome back to the C++ um, session itself, and we're looking at session number 10 today, and we're going to be looking at basically string inputs. So that's where we kind of get the user to put in some information into the program, and we're going to see how we can kind of store that in different aspects of it. Let's have a look at the two learning outcomes or learning objectives for this session itself. And we're going to be looking at understanding what string functions are. So it's somewhat roughly the same what we looked at last session, but we're going to be looking at two functions itself, which is the sin function and the getLine function, and we're going to see what is the difference between them and how both of these can be used in different manners. The second learning outcome or objective, we're going to be looking at what a string function is and write into the string inputs and using the getLine function. And we're going to be looking at a problem or an error which could kind of create an issue when we start actually programming. So let's have a look at a bit of theory. When we look at the sin function, it's basically shouting into the program. Throughout the series, we kind of I kind of mentioned the couts as shoutouts, so it's very similar to different programming languages where we use print line or print, and so we're using that for C++. We use cout, and cin or sin, we're using kind of the function to take something from the user, like an inputted word or a value from a keyboard, and obviously put this into your C++ memory allocation and kind of put it into a variable and use it for later calculations maybe. It's like kind of creating a calculator where you're asking the user to put in some numbers. So we can look at that. The getLine function itself is very similar to sin, but it just has different characteristics for it. The one thing you need to kind of remember that within the sin function, very similar to this, what we're talking about the last few sentences up here, is that when you use sin, so the minute you hit a spacebar, so a common problem is if you asking the user to type in their full name or their name, person might type in the first name, space, last name. What will happen is sin will save the first name. The minute you hit a spacebar, it's going to put everything which is coming after the spacebar into an input buffer, which you have the last word within that paragraph up here. And that can be recalled later, but it's not technically usable. Within getLine, we can basically write in anything we like, and we can have spaces as well. It's going to basically save everything for us. That's one of the biggest differences itself. So one thing to kind of remember, just as a quick recap, getLine saves everything. Sin basically saves it up to the first spacebar hit you do, and then everything else goes into an input buffer. And we can use something called a sin ignore function that can be used to overcome the problem by ignoring content left into input buffer itself. So I think when we look at the program itself, it makes slightly more sense. So I've got an example here, which I've got the program, and I've got next to it is a screenshot of us running the program, and whatever's in green is kind of giving us the answer. As you can see up here, we have a string variable, well, similar to a structure. We call it string, call it name, and we're waiting for the person to, or the user, type in something. In this case, hence we have a cout message, please enter your full name, and the person types in my case I type in my full name, and as you can see up here, I've typed in my whole name into it, which gets saved itself. So that got kind of saved, and the cout outputted whatever was the name. In this case, it only outputted Gurjeet. Now what actually happened was the sing Kohli, but because obviously after Gurjeet we hit the space bar, then we wrote on sing, which is the middle name, another space bar, and then Kohli, which is the surname. It put sing and Kohli into the input buffer, hence it only gave us Gurjeet. That's why in this line up here, I'll highlight for you, instead of saying hello or welcome Gurjeet Singh Kohli, it said welcome Gurjeet only. And this is the function itself, where we're basically using the getLine sin name, and what that is doing for us is outputting whatever's in the input buffer. And as you can see it in the results window up here, it's outputting thanks Singh Kohli that was left in the input buffer. So as a quick recap, we typed in, we asked this box up here, box number 1, we created a box with the characteristics of string, call it name. We put Gurjeet and Kohli into it. Gurjeet Singh Kohli into it. Try to put it in there. And what it happened was it saved only Gurjeet. This section up here, I hope this makes sense. I should have used maybe a different color. Singh Kohli goes into the input buffer. So it only saved up Gurjeet. And when we ask it to re-enter the name, which is this section up here, it uses the get line sin name function. It's basically giving us whatever's in our input buffer. As you can see up here, it gave us Singh Kohli. So it's not asking us again, just outputting whatever's left over in the buffer itself. So I hope that makes sense. Let's have a look at another slide. That's where we basically see how we can use the ignore function. And in the ignore function is sin ignore function is that we have the same program, but after the please re-enter your full name, we can use a sin ignore function 256 characters. So up to a maximum of 256 characters per entry, and it basically overcomes that problem, where then it's just giving us the whole name itself. It's basically emptying the input buffer itself, as you can see up here in the example. So in here, same as what we did before, string, and that's called name. We put in Gurjeet Singh Kohli, and what's happening in here, it's giving us in the first please enter your full name, give us the whole section up here, which you have in the output window up here. Then it's saying welcome Gurjeet. Obviously that's where the singing code is going into the input buffer. And in the next CL, where it says please re-enter your full name, and we're using whatever is in red up here, which is the sin ignore function with 256 characters. And as you can see up here, it's not giving you Singh Kohli, it's just giving Gurjeet Singh Kohli. That means it's ignoring whatever happened before, and it's just outputting the whole name itself, which was originally saved up. And obviously in the next line, we're using the get line and sin name function. Hence it says thanks, and the name again is Gurjeet Singh Kohli, the whole name, not just the first name itself. It's a pretty straightforward session itself. It's just one you need to remember. There's a few characteristics associated to it. Sin, it only saves only up to first spacebar hit, and the rest goes into an input buffer. Get line saves everything, regardless how many space bars you hit. And how we can kind of overcome that issue is using the sin ignore function within the program, where it's basically ignoring whatever is going into buffer and just kind of outputting it as you typed it in. So we won't have that issue, which we had a few slides back, where it's asking us to re-enter the full name, and all we're getting is Singh Kohli, but is basically thrown out of the input buffer. So I hope that makes more sense. But as I mentioned, sin, get line, skim through it again in the content itself, and kind of remember what each of these two functions do. And always remember that if we're using your sin function, we can always use a sin ignore 256, and that can kind of ignore stuff going into the input buffer, and we can use it as a whole program itself. Hope you enjoyed, and I see you back in your next session. Take care.